indictment is only one of a series to be handed down as a result of a special grand jury investigation. Grave robbing in Texas is this hour's top news story.
When people think about horror movies like Psycho, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or The Silence of the Lambs, they may not know that all of them were partly inspired by a real man. Well, maybe just Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Well, whatever the case, his name was Ed Gein, and he lived in Plainsfield, Wisconsin during the early and mid-1900s. Gein was not a typical serial killer, but the crimes he committed shocked the world and left a lasting mark on American culture. His story is both disturbing and sad, showing how a lonely, troubled man could become the center of some of the darkest chapters in true crime history. Hey everybody, my name is Blas, and I like to make videos about things that I like to talk about, which usually ends up being video games, but lately I've been really into urban legends, and like I said before, I wanted to try more true crime stuff, even though a lot of those are like tough to talk about because like 99% of them do not have happy endings, and I just don't want to be depressed all the time. So I'll very rarely talk about them, probably just the big guys, like the one we're talking about today. So that's my little introduction. The reason why we're talking about Ed Gein is because he will be, there's this show on Netflix that I've never seen, but each season is focused on a different serial killer, or serial killers, I should say plural because they're already working on multiple, but the next season coming up will be focused on Ed Gein. And that's sort of a cool thing to, learn about, but also at the same time it's depressing because what that show seems to do is paint the serial killers in a more sympathetic light, making people feel for them. And like I understand that a lot of serial killers are messed up people and they deserve some kind of I don't know, it's okay to pity them, but it's not okay to idolize them. So what we're doing today is I'm going to teach or discuss, I'm not a teacher, so we're going to discuss Ed Gein. I'm just yapping, so let's get into the video. Ed Gein was born on August 27, 1906 in La Crosse, Wisconsin. His childhood was difficult and shaped much of the person he became. His father, George, was an alcoholic who struggled to keep steady work, while his mother, Augusta, was a strict and controlling woman. Augusta, or I guess we're just going to call her that by now, I'll probably be butchering her name, I apologize. Augusta was deeply religious and often told Ed and his brother Henry that the world was full of sin, especially warning them about women. She raised Ed to believe that women, except for herself, were evil and dangerous. Because of Augusta's control, Ed grew up isolated from the outside world. He was shy, socially awkward, and had trouble making friends. Most of the time he spent working on the family farm, doing chores and listening to his mother's harsh lessons about morality. When his father died in 1940 and his brother Henry died under mysterious circumstances in 1944, Ed was left alone with his mother. When Augusta herself died in 1945, Ed lost the only person he was ever truly close to. Her death left him broken, and he lived the rest of his life in deep loneliness. After his mother died, Ed Gein became a recluse. He lived alone in the old farmhouse, which quickly fell into disrepair. He boarded up the rooms his mother had used, leaving them untouched, and instead lived in a small area of the house with no electricity or running water. Neighbors thought of him as odd but mostly harmless. He sometimes did odd jobs around town, and people noticed that he was polite but strange. Behind closed doors, however, Ed Gein's mind was slipping further into darkness. Obsessed with death and unable to cope with his isolation, he began visiting local graveyards at night. He dug up recently buried bodies, especially those of women, and brought parts of them home. At first, he claimed he only wanted to be near his mother again, but soon his actions grew far more disturbing. When police finally entered Ed Gein's quiet farmhouse in 1957, they stepped into a nightmare that seemed pulled from a horror story. The rooms were dark and decayed, and the air was thick with a smell no one could forget. What they found was not just evidence of death, but signs of a man who had spent years turning his home into a place of terror. Bernice Warden, the missing hardware store owner, was discovered in the shed, in a condition that horrified even the toughest of officers. Mary Hogan, a tavern owner who had vanished years earlier, was also tied to the same twisted fate when pieces of her were found among Gein's disturbing creations. Chairs, bowls, and clothing stitched from human remains revealed how far his madness had gone. It was not only the murders that chilled people, but the thought of Gein quietly living among these grim trophies, hiding a nightmare behind the walls of his plain farmhouse. Even more unsettling than the murders was the revelation that Gein had spent years prowling local graveyards under the cover of night. He confessed that when the moon was high and when the town slept, he would dig up freshly buried bodies of women that reminded him of his mother. These stolen remains were carried back to his farmhouse, where he shaped them into grotesque household items and clothing. To the townspeople, the cemeteries had always been a place of quiet rest, but now they realized that Gein had turned them into hunting grounds for his obsessions. Families were left wondering if their loved ones had been taken, and the line between death and safety seemed shattered forever. Ed Gein was arrested and quickly declared mentally unfit for trial. Doctors said he suffered from severe mental illness, including psychosis and an unhealthy attachment to his mother. He spent the rest of his life in mental institutions rather than prison. In 1968, after years of treatment, Gein was finally declared fit to stand trial. He was found guilty of murder, but he was considered insane at the time of his crimes. He remained in psychiatric hospitals until his death on July 26, 1984, at the age of 77. Although Ed Gein was only confirmed to have killed 2 women, the strange and gruesome details of his crimes made him one of the most infamous figures in American history. His story inspired several famous horror movie characters. First is Norman Bates. Norman Bates in Psycho mirrors Gein's unhealthy attachment to his mother and his struggle with identity after her death. Second and most famous connection is Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Leatherface reflects the gruesome side of Gein's crimes, especially his masks and furniture made from human skin. And thirdly, Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. Buffalo Bill shows the disturbing obsession with turning human bodies into something wearable. These characters became legends of horror, terrifying audiences for decades, but their roots can be traced back to one man whose real-life acts blurred the line between reality and nightmare. Because of this, Gein is sometimes called the grandfather of modern horror. His crimes changed how people thought about small-town America, proving that evil could hide even in the most of ordinary places. It is unfortunate that Ed Gein's grisly crimes are remembered because they overshadow the deeper tragedy of his life and the suffering of his victims. While many people know Gein as the Butcher of Plainfield or as the inspiration for famous horror characters, specifically Leatherface, far fewer remember the real human cost of what he did. Bernice Worden and Mary Hogan were women with families and lives of their own, yet in history their names are often reduced to footnotes beneath Gein's twisted story. At the same time, Gein himself was a deeply disturbed man shaped by abuse, isolation, and mental illness, and his legacy has become one of shock and fascination instead of reflection on how such pain and neglect can create tragedy. The way popular culture has turned his actions into entertainment, feeding into horror movies and books, makes it easy to forget the real terror that his community felt and the grief his crimes caused. Instead of being remembered as a warning about untreated mental illness and the damage of extreme isolation, Gein is often recalled only for the gruesome details of his crimes. This focus on the gore rather than the lessons behind it turns a tragic chapter in history into a spectacle, leaving behind the humanity of both his victims and the broken man himself. In conclusion, Ed Gein's life and crimes are a dark reminder of how loneliness, mental illness, and obsession can lead to terrifying actions. He was not the most active or prolific killer, but the shocking way he lived and what police found in his home left an unforgettable scar on American culture. His story is both a tragedy and a horror, showing how a man shaped by an abusive upbringing and isolation could become a figure who still haunts true crime and horror stories today. While his actions caused great pain, they also gave rise to cautionary tales and some of the most iconic horror characters of all time. So that was the essay portion. I had a few words to say afterward. So, studying Ed Gein and serial killers as a whole, throughout portions of my life, whether out of morbid curiosity or doing schoolwork or just whatever, if I find myself reading about a serial killer, it's hard to pity them. It's hard to somehow not feel bad for them in a way. because despite how messed up, broken, and demonic that they can be, they're still human. Ed Gein being lonely and being socially awkward is traits that we could all relate to. The difference is that, or the things that we can learn is that we have to purposely push ourselves. It's gonna hurt and it's scary, but you have to push ourselves to talk to other people, to try to be better. Because if you succumb to your own feelings and your own fears, then we might as well just be one step away from demons like Ed Gein. So it's always good to take care of yourself and know when to push yourself, because there's too much fear in the world today, and well, it never hurts to try. That's all from me. I'll see you guys in the next one. I thank you guys for watching this far. Thank you guys for clicking on the video. Leave a like if you liked the video, comment if you want to leave a comment, and subscribe if you want to see more. So I'm sorry my last video wasn't as impactful. I mostly did that as a personal video for me and my grandfather, so I apologize if not a lot of people liked it. And that's really it. I am planning on another Dead by Daylight chapter, a viewer recommended, or an idea from a viewer basically. Of course I'll show them their comment and pay them props. I'm sorry, I'm not too much in the right headspace because I've been under the weather. So if I'm slurring my words extra or I sound a bit off, that's why. But I wanted to get a video out just so I wouldn't seem lazy, which I am, but I'm trying not to be, you know. Gotta keep yourself active, even your mind. So, yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good day and or night, and yeah, that's about it. Bye-bye.